New research points to a double threat for women struggling with emotional challenges. A study in the American Heart Association's journal says that women with post-traumatic stress could face a 60% higher risk of cardiovascular disease. For other trauma, the risk is 45% higher. Our Dr. Tara Narula is a cardiologist at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York and joins us once again at the table. Good to see you, Tara.
Good to see you.
Now, this study says that women have a much higher rate of PTSD than men. Does that surprise you, and what stands out to you about this study?
Yeah, so PTSD is more common than we think, and in women, it's 2 times more common than in men. And so this was really the first study that looked at PTSD and trauma in women and how that influences their risk of cardiovascular disease. Researchers looked at 50,000 women over the span of 20 years, and they gave them a questionnaire at the end of that 20 years to ask about traumatic events and PTSD symptoms. And what they found was that women who reported severe PTSD or several symptoms of PTSD had a 60% increased risk of heart attack and stroke. And interestingly, those women who just reported trauma alone, one traumatic event, had a 45% increased risk. Now, you might think, well, maybe that's because they're leading unhealthy lifestyles. They're smoking, they're not exercising. But in fact, those unhealthy lifestyles accounted for less than 50% of the increase that we saw.
When we hear PTSD, we think of symptoms after returning from war, but it can be many different things, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's a bit confusing for people. So PTSD affects about 8 million Americans, and the lifetime prevalence for a woman is about 9% and 3% for a man. And it comes with any sort of exposure to death or injury or sexual assault. So things like a motor vehicle accident, a natural disaster, a life-threatening illness, hospitalization in the intensive care unit, sexual assault or physical injury, all of those can lead to PTSD. Most of the symptoms occur after 1 or a couple months of exposure to the trauma, but in 25% of people, symptoms can occur as late as 6 months after the trauma.
So what is the biological link between the head and the heart?
Right, so we keep trying to get this message out that there is a link. There's so much crosstalk between what happens up here and what happens down here. And so in PTSD, unfortunately, what happens is that you have flashbacks. You're reliving the event over and over again. It's like you can't forget it. And you're hyper aroused, so you're always in a state of feeling like a danger might happen. So what that does is you're turning that stress response on in your body over and over again, months, weeks, years. And so you're increasing your heart rate, you're increasing your blood pressure, you're causing dysregulation of the stress response system and the stress hormones, and you're increasing inflammatory markers. And all of that can cause constriction of blood vessels and clots to form in blood vessels.
And quickly, this new study and research that shows half of all cardiovascular deaths can be prevented. There's 600,000 Americans that die every year from heart disease.
Yes. Every single cardiologist, this is what we try to educate our patients on. The only thing you can't control is your age and your genetics. Every single rest of the risk factors for heart disease and stroke are modifiable. High blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes. So there's so much power that people have to make a difference in their own risk and their own life.
Can't say that enough.
No,
right.
you can't.
At that point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Tara Narula. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you.
You too.